So it's 1:30. We'll call the meeting to order. And do we have any public comments before, or should we just have? Let's get attendance. Irene.
Thank you, Chair. So I am showing attendance by the full subcommittee, which includes Chair Cruz, Vice Chair Paula, City Manager Kelly, Police Chief Ferguson, and Finance Director Holmes, but also joined by Assistant City Manager, Community Development Director Thompson.
Thank you. So we have some communications here from Shirley Davis. Zero tolerance for illegal fireworks. How does it normally go? Do we normally read or discuss the communications, David?
Madam Chair, I'd be happy just to provide an overview of the communication that we received for the record. The first communication from Shirley Davis is in regards to subject matter zero tolerance for illegal fireworks, and the reference is to the evening of July 4th in her experience is seeing illegal fireworks and referring that to our police department, and then concerned that our police department was not enforcing the illegal fireworks. Staff did do a follow-up, and both myself and the chief, and we determined we did respond to Ms. Davis' complaints. However, the culprit lighting the illegal fireworks was not caught in the act or otherwise apprehended. So that was basically the end of the enforcement activity that was taken. The chief, if there's anything else you want to offer in terms of the response.
Yeah, David is exactly right. We did respond. I went ahead and did some immediate follow-up, checked our records incident management system, found out that we did respond there on 3 different occasions, and then spoke to Lieutenant Parker, who was actually on duty in uniform and responding to calls. He personally told me that he did a lot for the residents. One of the challenges with the Shirley wrote was that, we needed education training on how to deal with these. One of the problems that we run into, these things happen fast. Of course, by the time we get from one town to the other to catch these, there's nothing there. And as you know, we have to observe this in our presence in order to actually enforce any part of this. We actually have to see them doing this in progress. We only had 3 people on that night. We handled 34 different calls, just fireworks related. That didn't include our other law enforcement calls. So we had a lot of challenges trying to get back and forth across town with these calls, but we did respond 3 times. We had total between July 1st and July 4th, 43 total fireworks calls. Majority of those, if not all of those, were reports of illegal activity, illegal fireworks. So we were challenged. Staffing played a big role too, but we just wanted to reiterate that we did respond and we did make contact. Something she believed we didn't do.
Do you mean education for the public so that they know what to expect from the police?
We don't put that necessarily out there because I never want to tell anybody out there if we're shorthanded on this like that. I'm just telling you if we're shorthanded. The fact is we tried to get to all these calls. There were a lot of them that day. So I just wanted to respond to her because she indicated that law enforcement, there's courses available to educate them on how to handle this. We understand it. The problem is we have to be able to observe it happening in order to enforce it. If we show up to a house and they've already been discharged, there's not a whole lot we can do. Warn, advise. We have to see it in order to enforce it.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the explanation. Just a quick question. Do we normally follow up with the reporting party? Do we normally contact them, let them know what we found and what the situation was?
So I can't say all of the time. I think I would be inaccurate if I said all the time. Specifically on July 4th, we are going call to call. And I speak from experience because I worked last year in the bar because I wanted to see how it was here in Cloverdale. It is nonstop. The women's association is dark. It is nonstop across the city, back and forth, all night long. And what made it particularly challenging this time and why it might not appear that we were making contacts, we were very short. 3 people is not a lot to deal with the city on this particular night. So those are the challenges. But I can tell you, even I have personally done when I was working here. We tried, in this case, there was contact made, but not every time.
And I understand that. I know workload dictates. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
But you know, I think it's kind of a futile exercise, because by the time we get to a place, the situation's gonna be over, you know, because that has to happen immediately.
Yeah.
Especially fireworks, either they go off or they don't.
Yeah.
I think sometimes there is a benefit to a response. I understand from the lieutenant, he did talk to the individual, so at least they're kind of put on notice that we responded and had a conversation. Now, getting back to the chief's point, it has to react inside of, but, you know, then of course, maybe the neighbor, like the next time, but at least we did have that, something like that communication with an individual who was affected by fireworks.
Or the location, not necessarily an individual, so to speak, which is another factor in determining if you can cite how you do it, who did it. Right? Normally you have a house full of people here, nobody's really going to step right out. It's my experience.
Yeah.
You know, so those things are the challenges. There was contact with residents, and they were warned in advance. That's pretty much all we could have done.
Yeah, it's just that I think people have expectations that cannot be met. And that's why I say it might be just a futile exercise, because people are, you know, we don't say, if we don't answer, we're not gonna come over, because that would give people more opening. But at the same time, the neighbors expect more than what you can provide.
Yeah.
And that's why I was asking about the question of education. I think we need to educate the public when they call, and we need to explain to them rather than, I know, you guys.
Yeah. One of the things you probably notice every year is we do put out the things prior to. We do explain a lot of where you can't do things, but we also talk about the fireworks and things like that. So there is some educational standpoint out there. I do understand what you're saying. There is some pre-4th of July information that's out there, hoping that people understand. We're going to be enforcing this. They're illegal, like that.
Well, thank you very much for your work, and what a stretch.
Yeah.
Okay, and the water bill.
This is, Madam Chair, the next item was submitted, this correspondence to Councilmember Bagby. Actually, the gist of the communication is that the water bills are not easy to read, and just that the bill display numbers, how much water used, how much was used for that for the same period last year, the percentage increase or decrease, and the reduction in gallons needs to meet the target. This is an area where we need to look at carefully how we can address current drought conditions with information on the bill. There's really only a little small area where we have an opportunity to put information relative to past water use. And our water use is in units, so it is a challenge because it's not in gallons. That's how most people understand their water use is in gallons, not units. And so it would require some conversion factor, upgrade our billing to accommodate this Golden's request. But this is something we can look at, see if we can improve how we portray our water data, our billing data on our water bill, that is. The other aspect just to be aware of is a number of folks do utilize EK, don't even actually look at their bill. And so wonders how effective it is to utilize that as a practice. But with that said, it's like to look at it and want to understand their water usage better, it's an opportunity for the city to try and improve how we show past usage and current usage. I know our staff looked at it and we've confronted with challenges on how we do that. I don't know, Susie, if you have anything.
Yeah, that would be ideal if we could do that. The other thing would be is if people could track their phone, which is the process that we started, updating our water meters, so that they can eventually go to where you can track them by the hour, instead of waiting until the end of the month. Because right now, we don't have a way to tell how much is being used unless someone actually goes out and reads the meter.
So what do you mean track it? Online?
Exactly.
Well, that's again part of the problem. Not everybody's online, nobody has skills to do that. And this issue of the water bill has been brought up before. Last year, remember, I wanted to include some information, that was pertinent to the community. And because of the format that you guys use, it doesn't allow for you. So is it possible to look into a different format that you can use? Because what is it, you buy a service, is that what it is? And it comes to the format?
If we change our format, it's not just utility billing that we're changing. We're
Right.
changing.
So that's what I would like to know. What is it? What is that, like a package program?
Yes.
You buy?
Yes.
And then it doesn't give you any alternatives of what kind of billing format you use.
I'm not sure if we can adjust it to be by the gallon. Is that?
No. It's just the whole concept. Yeah, you buy a package for the city to use on different things.
Exactly.
And with that package comes the water bill.
Yes.
Format.
Perfect.
So my question is there a particular format that you would choose in that package? Different than the one that you have now, because I do know it's very.
Yeah, we could do it separately, but we couldn't use it with Springbrook is our software provider.
So it's a software.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Chair, just a quick question. Is there a way we can maybe insert a chart that breaks from units, how many units equal a gallon? So a person can calculate what they're using,
I think
not changing the software, but just having a simple way to convert it so you know what a unit means. A half gallon, 3/4 of a gallon. So you could simply look at it, say I use 15 units, which equals 10 gallons or
So
whatever.
is it a problem of space? Because I think that's what it was.
Exactly.
Well,
And
and
I do
insert
think it
in
says
the-
it on the back of 1 unit is 748 gallons. So that is already on the bill, but you would have to do that.
But you mean an insert like an
And
additional.
insert.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
We could, why don't we,
Take a look at it.
if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, we can, put this on the, next agenda is, we'll work, utility billing format, we can bring back, some options, including putting in an insert. We do have a flyer on our website about how to read your bill, how to read your meter. So maybe we can put something together that can be either included in the bill or that we promote via the newsletter or social media. To try to help educate the community about the billing statement.
Yeah.
I just don't have it in front of me, it's hard
No,
for us,
that's
maybe we can look at how
fine,
we-
but, you know, I've had this issue before too, Joe, because the format doesn't allow for very much change or information to be added. Unless it's like one line at the bottom, but I think the insert would be appropriate.
As well as I'd like more ideas. If you could look at different software that might be available, and what the cost difference would be, then we can maybe just bounce those things around as a thought.
Or even
When it comes
contact
back.
them to see if there's any additional option with the software. Which is other places have different look.
So this would be an agenda item.
And I know Ms. Sullivan is an elder, probably doesn't play around with it. So, okay, well, thank you very much. Any comments of anybody else? Okay. And comments? Any members of the public, either online or in person, asking questions? Any hands raised?
No hands are raised in Zoom, Chair.
Okay. And for those who are watching online, you can make public comments at this moment. Okay, so that's the second, and no hands. Thank you. So, on approval of the minutes, I have to refrain from voting on that because that was last year. I mean, I read them.
Yeah, and I was not here, though. I can, if we approve them, city attorney has said that that's appropriate, so I will make that motion. Move forward.
And I'll bring you that, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Which was approved by all city.
So Madam Chair, I'd like to suggest, since we have a guest here from the city newsletter, that we may want to take that item first, just in
Yes.
case their schedule.
Yes, this is appropriate. I don't like to have our guests wait until the last of the
Well,
meeting.
we'd love you to stay for the whole meeting, but
I know that it might not be too, but we have to be. So please, we are welcoming the Cloverdale page, correct?
Cloverdale Connect.
Cloverdale Connect.
Great, so, I don't know if anybody needs a copy of this paper. I brought extra copies of the July issue, the August issue, that's the post office right now, so I'm happy to put these on the table. So, as a communication device to the city of Cloverdale, I print 6,000 copies every month, 5,813 I pay the post office to direct mail to all the post office boxes, mailboxes, and business addresses in the greater Cloverdale area. So that's all the 95425 plus parts of northern Geyserville. I cover that too. So instead of having a free paper that people pick up if they have to be someplace or having a subscription base, I chose to pay the post office, so that way I know the distribution is complete. In addition to the 5,813 issues that I mail out, then I also provide stacks of the paper, Dahlia and Sage, and Plank at the UPS store, and I partner with the Chamber of Commerce. She puts them in all the welcome bags when there's newcomers to town, and that's usually about 40 to 50 copies per month. So as a vehicle to communicate with the Cloverdale community, it becomes quite cost effective because if you were to spend budget on stamps to mail a letter to 5,800 people, it would be over $3,000 just for the postage. So I'm taking care of the postage. So I think it would be an appropriate place if the city has it in their budget to communicate to the community, because I reach just about everybody. This is it's been over a year since the paper has been in place, and it has been warmly received by readers. I get emails and letters and phone calls of people saying that they appreciate having a printed paper back in town again. One of the things that's unique about the paper is that I do not have public opinion. I do not write stories that are divisive. I think of the paper as a community hub that's for encouraging to keep people connected together. And that's how the paper was started. It was during the pandemic last year when I started it, when we were all feeling really separated and out of touch with each other. And I thought, well, this is a way to connect everyone in town. And it's more important than ever to have a printed paper, because I think 28% of our community is over 55. And I know those people still enjoy something tangible, and I know a lot of younger people do too. So that's kind of an overview of what the paper is. As far as advertising space, there's space from as small as business cards up to full pages. So there's all kinds of price points, and of course, like all advertising, The higher the frequency you commit to, the less cost per ad space it is. So it's kind of a Cloverdale Connect 101 basic description. So I'd love to answer any questions that anybody has.
Dana, well, first I want to say thank you for agreeing to come to the Finance Admin and Police Subcommittee and give us an overview of Cloverdale Connect. And I wonder for our subcommittee members, if you could share with us, the layout. I see there's kind of two concepts, well, multiple concepts, but half pages vertical, half pages horizontal, full page, obviously, and then quarter page. And just a big picture overview of the pricing for those different page sizes.
Sure. So the paper is, unlike other papers that are set up by column inch, I've been in the advertising business for decades. I was in radio and television for years, and then I was in print. And I had my own advertising agency for 20 years. And every different paper had different column inch sizes. And so when I'd go to place advertising, it would be crazy. So I went to a basic inch scheme. It was just so much simpler. So what I've done is there's full pages, of course. I'm sorry. There's half pages vertically. There's half pages horizontally. There's quarter pages horizontally. There's quarter pages vertically. And eighth, the same thing. And 16th pages. And of course, there's only one orientation for the business card because otherwise they won't all fit. So there's lots of different sizes and shapes that are available for use. So far as pricing goes, prices are anywhere from, if it was a one-time advertiser and they had an event in town, full page would be $2,000. But since it's the city, I would go off the 12-time rate. So full page is $1,700 per month, half page is $820, quarter page is $470, eighth page is $270, and a 16th page, which is 10 square inches, is $175. So that's how the prices break out. So you can see if you were going to send a letter out that was 8.5 by 11, and you were going to mail it to the post office for over $3,000 of postage, this is a big savings. So that's the pricing.
Thank you, Dana, for that. It was very helpful.
Okay, great.
So if I may, Madam Chair, first of all, thank you for being here and thank you for this information. You do a fantastic job on the Cloverdale Connect. And one of the goals, big goal of the City Council is to kind of get information out to the community. When we were looking at discussing different options that are available. And of course, since the Reveille no longer exists, that was a big hit to the city, obviously, because we used to do close to home articles and different articles. And of course, there was no charge for those. They would print them. The city currently doesn't have a big budget to do this communication, but there is a need to get information out. Being a non-for-profit organization, but the desire to kind of communicate with people is big, not only for the city wanting to get information out, people wanting to know what's going on. And more importantly, there's a lot of misinformation. And having a vehicle that we could actually put out facts to the community as a whole of what some of the issues are, such as things that we talked about, response to calls for service and how that works. So we're hoping to kind of do a monthly article. As the size is something we talked about, and I would think at least at a half page, because there's so many departments and so many areas that we would want to cover. Of course, the big thing for us would be the budget and trying to come up with a mechanism to fund that. So that's kind of where I wanted to lay that foundation to see if, since it's a non-for-profit community effort to communicate and get information, clarify misinformation, if there's any way that we could maybe get maybe like a blanket deal versus the monthly rate that's laid out. I mean, I don't know you, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, you certainly may want to think about it, but that's kind of what we wanted to kind of explore, because we're trying to have it a win-win. You have the perfect vehicle to get that out there. We have the desire to share it. We have the desire to get misinformation corrected and try to kind of bond and bring things back in focus and recognize when this goes to a lot of homes, all the homes, and it's the perfect vehicle. So we want to partner to try to make that happen.
All right, I appreciate that. Yeah. One of the things, I just had a conversation with Lieutenant Parker last week at the Cloverdale Kids event. And I talked to him about, oh, it'd be great to get a law enforcement article every month, not saying, you know, here's the dates cars were broken into. I don't want a police blog. That's really negative information. I want to hear from law enforcement what to be on the lookout for. You know, maybe there's a lot of Amazon scam phone calls going on right now. Bicycle thefts. Let's not talk about the bicycle thefts. Let's talk about how do we prevent them? What can we do as a community to prevent things like that happening? So I'd love to see something that's much more of a positive spin. And I knew that when I came here that one of the considerations would be price, because of course, I mean, the city has a limited budget. And I understand that. So I'm willing to work with the city on making something that works for both of us. I'm not a big business. This is it. You know, I'm the editor, publisher, writer, marketing person. I have one person that helps me with the layout the day before it goes to the printer. So I don't have huge salaries I have to take care of, but I do need to compensate myself for my time. But that allows me the ability to say, all right, you know, let's collaborate. Tell me what you want, tell me what you can afford, and let me see how I can make that work. But I think it's a unique opportunity to be proactive, to get in front of the parade before, you know, I see the signs around town, no triple water rates. Let's get in front of that and educate people on why are the rates what they are, what does it take to deliver water to each home? You know, that kind of information. I think it would also be important to have photos of people who work for the city, whether it's city council, which I don't think of the place so much, but Chief Ferguson or David Kelly, so people get to know a human. It's much harder to be irritated with somebody if you've seen them face to face. If I'm driving through traffic and somebody cuts me off and it's my neighbor, I'm going to go, oh, that's okay, sorry. Somebody I don't know, I'm more tends to be cranky about it. So we have to put faces with all these people in town too. So it's not the city, it's, you know, Marta who lives 3 blocks from me and that kind of a thing, that we're all in this together. So let's figure out what will work.
And one of my concerns, as you already know, is the access and equity, which is an objective of the city. And we need to make sure that it reflects all aspects of the Cloverdale community, especially with the good percentage of Latino population that we have. And yes, we cover the elderly pretty much with the senior center. They have a good way of reaching out to the senior community. But there's not an established way of reaching out to the remainder of the community. And there's some issues that have to do with the misinformation that Councilmember Powell is talking about that impact all members of the community and some of the people that do not speak English. So I think that we won't be able to do dissertations on any topic, but maybe just quick answers to some of these issues of misinformation. Like one to bullet in English, one to bullet in Spanish. And I'll be more than happy to be your performer here. I'll be more than happy to work with you on providing new information or even editing if you happen to do the Google Translate, which, as we already know, is not the most.
Yeah, it's horrible, really, yeah.
But, you know, I'm here. I always overstretch myself. That's okay. This is something that is close to my heart and close to us because we have an obligation to all. So that's something that would need to be taken into account when we decide to address a particular issue.
So how is that issue handled right now? I received the city newsletter did I opt in for a language when I said, yes, I want the city newsletter? I don't remember. Because I get an
Currently,
English version.
currently it defaults to English,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a button that you can click
Oh,
on the
okay.
website. I think that's how it works. I can't remember if it's the right-hand corner or the left-hand corner, but you can choose
Yeah.
your language.
Mhm.
I think there's multiple languages too.
Yes, it'll bring down, I think
Oh,
it actually brings
okay.
down the flags with them.
And think that would be good to have a little picture in the Cloverdale Connect to say if you want to do different language, because we also have to go to Thai or Chinese who are not fluent in English.
Trying to remind people that there's other options available. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, but it's impossible for me to take this and translate everything into Spanish
Oh, no,
and the
no.
same issue. Because it doubles, everything
No,
doubles
we're
my
just talking
cost.
about issues we are concerned
But
about.
since it's, yeah, coming from the city, there might be a way to, accommodate both languages in a way.
Or at least in the city part, it could be done in the English language with information how to access it, step by step in the Spanish
Correct.
on the
Mhm.
website, because, or Asian, Asian or whatever language.
Right.
But just a reference so they know, and if they have a problem, they can call, get some assistance.
All right. That's a good solution to it too.
And I was gonna ask you, do you have like an immediate highlight of events that are going to take place in Cloverdale?
You know, it's all a matter of what do I receive, what information do I receive? And so when people send me information on a timely basis of what's coming up, then I can include, here's some events that are happening. If I don't have the
Yes.
woman power to go out and find it from people.
What is normally your deadline?
The deadlines are the third Friday of every month.
Okay, that's very important for all of us.
Right, so the last deadline was, let's see, July 23rd. And that's, if I have it the third Friday of each month, and that allows me a week then to write the remaining articles, do the layout, get it to the printer. It's at the printers today, will be at the post office this afternoon. I try to get it in the mail as close to or before the 1st as possible. Because there's often dated information in there.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions?
No, I just have a comment. I guess if you agree, Madam Chair, I'd like to maybe city manager and I can sit down and come up with what we think might be a reasonable plan and put it on the agenda for next month for us to bring it back and we can weigh in and then we can bring it to the full council.
You need a plan of issues.
Well,
we need to
talking
address.
about the size of the thing that we would need, how it would work. City manager can meet with Dana and talk about price. I don't want to be part of that conversation, but just what I vision is the way it would work as far as the newsletter, the amount of space we may need to start. And so we can come back with something tangible to talk about, not necessarily what's going to be in the article. It's just the size and what's.
I think.
Or you're welcome to do that and.
No, you're fine, but I think we also need to include possible subject matters that we would want to touch upon. So that the council knows that it's not just gonna be repetition of issues that are already on the website or things that she's already talking about, So I think because I don't want people to think that we are doing a repetition of something that's already happening, even though it's gonna be in print,
Well,
which
we'll
is what we're
talk about
looking
that.
for. Yeah,
We'll talk about it.
but it'll be good to see some ideas.
And once I know what size your budget allows and we negotiate what's a fair rate for everybody, I can give you a guideline, okay, that'll be 360 words, or that'll be 180 words, or, so you'll have a real clear idea, how much space you'll have.
And then at the same time, some of the issues that the chief might want to integrate because it will be hard to.
Yeah, I envision it more being each department would have a set amount and they would be putting current updates into this. And then as we see if there's concerns that are expressed, such as the water bill, that would be something that would go to that person and say, you put something out that explains how to do that. So trying to answer situations, but I vision each department, because there is a concern, not a concern, but an interest in police, interest in finance, interest in what's going on with the city government. Council, you may have an item that you say, as council, could you put a sentence or two on this item? Current things,
Yes.
or to address what we see on social media, a lot of things that are not accurate, that are critical, that give us an opportunity to address those with facts. That's what I vision.
Yeah, I think informational, and get in front of the crowd. I had somebody call me up and they were highly agitated about a past murder that happened years ago that I have no knowledge of. And they wanted me to feature a full page on this, and I said, it just doesn't fit with the format. I don't want to, get into negativity and controversy. So it's that kind of thing that I steer away from. And that could be approached as, how do you keep yourself safe? What is self-defense and what isn't? What do you do about home invasion? These things that happen, without getting into specifics that might be polarizing.
Refer them to the person.
Right, and that's what I do. I say, check the Reveille's website and check the Press Democrat.
Thank you very much for your
Sure.
work
Thank you.
and for your initiative.
All right, thanks. Anything else from me?
So thank you, Dana, for attending, and I'll like to follow up with you, just get a better understanding of, the number of words, kind of the layout perspective, so that when I have conversations with Councilmember Paula and Mayor Cruz, kind of gives us a little more details on how we might come up with, whether it's a full page, a half page, thinking about photographs, for example. how
Right,
that-
and they take a lot of real estate.
Yeah,
And they're
and
important.
it would be nice when we take the paper, so that you could give us like, this is the quarter page, and this is the half page, or, so that we have an idea.
Oh, yeah, I thought that was in the packet that I mailed.
The packet that we received only has like 2 pages, and it gives us width and height, and then the prices. It doesn't have the line, the color columns like you have there.
Oh, you don't have the copy of this?
No.
Okay,
At least that's not how it came up.
okay. So I'm happy to, I will email that to,
Because it would be nice if you could understand.
it makes it really easy, otherwise you're
Since
just.
we are not doing this for like you.
Right.
It doesn't come out
You
just
know.
as failure.
Right, and then I'll do all the formatting, the verbiage that you send me. You don't have to have a graphic designer do anything, so.
You make it fit.
Right, I'll make it. fit, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, wonderful. There's nothing else. I'll
Thank
leave
you
you to
so
your
much.
discussion.
Appreciate your time, and
Thank
thank
you
you
very
for doing this over them.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a labor of love so far.
So is that the plan? Is that agreeable?
That's agreeable.
We'll just, we're definitely not gonna make any decisions, we'll just come up with a suggestion.
Yes. So that we won't be suffering from the- And I think we need something to do with this.
I think it's gonna be very positive.
It is a very positive thing. So, thank you, David, for doing that. So, let's go back to the dramatic enforcement. You want to talk about that?
Yes, I'd love to. I really feel that our city needs to put in place a proactive code enforcement program. When cannabis first came around way back, several years back, one of the things that we talked about with setting the sales tax on that was to be able to do two major things, amongst other things. The two major things was to put in place a code enforcement officer that would be responsible for making sure that the cannabis businesses are complying with both state law as well as city ordinance. And the second part was an education component that information to be developed to go for you, you know, on the pros and more importantly, the cons of certain types of cannabis and use, et cetera. And I know there was a decision made not to move forward with the code enforcement because we really didn't know what kind of tax monies we were going to have. And that was, so it's got to put on hold for about a year to kind of see what the numbers penciled out to be. But I think we're at a place where we really need to refocus on a code enforcement. And it goes broader than just cannabis. There's a lot of complaints within the community about what I call blighted areas. And I'll just put out the car wash as one of them. It's a horrible thing. It's been an eyesore for many, many years, and it's gotten a lot worse. And people that live in the community take a lot of pride in our community. They love Cloverdale. They like it. And when you see a lot of blight, it really just takes away. You become embarrassed in your own town. And I don't think it's appropriate to have a code enforcement program that's complaint driven. That means you got to have neighbors start calling on neighbors. And it creates a lot of tension in the community and in your neighborhood. It really should just be a fair evaluate where there's rules. We have several ordinances that have been on the books for years. And one of them is the nuisance ordinance, it's chapter 8.02 of our code. And then we also have the weed abatement ordinance, which is 8.16. And they're very clear what the ordinances are intended. And it's meant that people should maintain the property. They can't let it deteriorate to a point where it starts devaluating people's properties and makes it basically you have rodents, rats, and different things that are hibernating in these properties, and we're just not moving on it. I think we need to put in place. So that's where I wanted to get this back on the agenda to kind of see what we need to do to move that program forward. I do feel it would be more suited under the police department versus under planning, because a lot of these require interaction with the courts. It requires getting abatement warrants. May at some point require getting a they call it inspection warrant. If it's a health hazard, you need to go through the system, and the police have that experience. I mean, they work. This is what they do. Planning or planners, they don't typically interact with the courts. They usually rely more on the city attorney. Of course, city attorneys are, paid for city attorneys in their time, and it doesn't move as fast. So, I really think a well thought out code enforcement program under the police department. It could be, when I even thought when I threw this out to the police chief and the city manager, just as a thought, maybe taking our current community service officer program and incorporate it, because they kind of overlap in some areas. They're both responsible for enforcement of ordinances. And this would be a new position, not the current position, but to put it under that umbrella where once trained, they would have that supervision support they need handling those types of things. So that's kind of why.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that, because I did mention to you in the past that I'm also concerned about the lack of enforcement and stuff. And I know that at one point there was an opening, or well, a consideration of opening an enforcement officer, and it didn't apply because of lack of money. But I think it definitely needs to be perhaps something that is not necessarily total responsibility of the department, but maybe in combination with it. What stuff I have been doing. But there are areas, not only in terms of the weed abatement and the rodents and so on, but also in terms of cars that are just in the middle of the street for months and months and months, and there's a flat tire, they don't have a sticker or something as such, or they are pulled into the person's property. But it's definitely something serious. And then there are all these trailers throughout also the fact that many people just make an entry to the side of their house. They break the fence and they do that entry. And, you know, they cross the sidewalk and they damage the sidewalk and the curbs and so on. So people take a lot of liberty to do things here without permits and so on. And also the fact that, you know, that there are all these basketball courts throughout town. And there are even like ramps to the skateboard. And, you know, it's an issue of safety for the members of the community, not only pedestrians, but people who are driving. In addition, people are parking everywhere and anywhere. So, you know, it's not that we're gonna become the police of Cloverdale, but there has to be something done around that. And, yeah, that's just kind of my thought also.
Thank you for that. And just to make sure I'm clarify one important point, that being under the police would not necessarily mean they're doing police entirely. They'd be coordinating with planners, they'd be coordinating with the building inspector and the fire marshal, because they would be collaborating on all those codes, but they would come under the police because the police have the background experience and the ability to back and support them in the enforcement aspect. But they would be working with planning, with the building inspection for unsafe houses that may need to be red tagged because it's unsafe. They could be working with the fire marshal because of a safety issue. So they would be a team player in that whole circle as a team, but the supervision would come from the police.
That's really gets to decide. We're just talking and seeing things that we would like to change to the community.
So,
Well, let me start, Chief, and then you can weigh in. I mean, what I hear from the subcommittee is that there's support for establishing, moving code enforcement into a proactive phase. That certainly is different from how we've been addressing code enforcement now in the last 5 years, which has really been on a referral basis. So would be a change to move to a proactive, you know, kind of search looking for versus getting code matters referred to us. So we use some current practices. Right now it's about once a week for about 4 hours, where there's kind of a windshield survey done, checking on status and looking for violations. But you know, obviously to ramp it to a more full-time position would have cost implications. It seems to me that council would want to see the different alternatives laid out for consideration, including hiring a community services officer and adding that position in the police department, or as we did before, recruiting specifically for a code enforcement officer, and have that cost analysis be provided to council along with that alternative. Some options I think would be reasonable to look at would be whether we can find a firm or consultant or individual that might be able to contract with, provide services, maybe have that flexibility and adaptability to ramp it up and ramp it down with a certain number of hours per week. Because the other consideration with respect to the position is not just the salary, it's the cost associated with the training, PERS liability, but also the space in the office, having a space carved out for them or him or her. So those are just things. Those will be one-time costs that we want to cover as part of onboarding a new position. So this would be a big change for council from moving to kind of what we've been of not adding staff, going back to adding staff. So that would be something we want council to feel comfortable with making that decision. Because obviously once you staff up, it's not always easy to staff that down. And lay out options in terms of the reporting structure. I think it makes a lot of sense that we do hire a position for the reasons outlined Councilor Paul and put it in the police department, because of the kind of the enforcement aspect to it, because we do see with the more challenging code enforcement cases, really we're gonna have multiple cases that are gonna be necessary to go through the court process. And that's really where we're at, and that's why some of these have an advance. We haven't taken the tough position, and really requires council to also support staff once we bring those forward, because our experience even with the car wash is that the council tends to be a little more flexible than sometimes the code enforcement process provides for it in the code. So just acknowledging that sometimes as we go through the process, it's sometimes a little bit of the wheel tends to lose itself. But understanding that it's an issue and it wants to be addressed, in order for us to do it, we definitely need those additional resources.
Well, again, compliance is what we're after, not necessarily the citation, the court action compliance. And I'm under the mindset 80–85% will probably more than likely comply once they understand what they need to do, and that the city is serious. It's the other 15% that you're right. It's going to require more, and I think support is there within the council. I think I've heard all along that this community as a whole are very upset when people let their properties get to a point where they got cars that are inoperable sitting on their front lawns, on their driveways. The house is in disrepair, and we had the one case that we're currently working where this person has a beautiful home, wants to sell it, but he's got this house next door to him and it's totally devalued his home, and that's just not okay. And there's nothing he can do about it other than beg the city to take enforcement action, which we're doing, but it takes a lot of time. And I just think it's something that you can take that scenario and move it around the city. I think the will's there. People want it. They take pride in the community. And I think putting the right program in, again, not a heavy-handed program, but an education program with reasonable timelines, but expecting results. And if we get that, I think we're going to see some success. And just as a thought. And if we don't, then we go to that next level. But it would be after all those things. That's how I vision it.
I just to support what you say. I think that there's a need to review the ordinances that are on the books. I know there are many of those that have been updated, but those that refer specifically to issues of neighborhoods and issues of abandoned vehicles and abandoned property. Those are the things that have to be focusing on, and then we can move on to other things. And little by little, just like with the governance manual, we just start working on it.
Yeah, something I would want to just make sure council supports is, there's a tremendous need for additional staff. I can tell you, as someone that spends a lot of my time on weekends and every night, that we definitely need additional staffing. So when I hear something, this code enforcement is a priority and over, other staffing needs too. So, I just want to make sure that council goes in with high built and that adding staff is a big deal. We know we've had requests from city engineer to add positions, and there's a tremendous need in the public works department, there's a tremendous need in the city manager's office. There's definitely need for more officers. That this rises to that priority at the top level of funding additional positions. I do think there's a need for additional positions within the city, and I just want to make sure that this fits your priority of funding that new position. It's above those other key work objectives that council.
And isn't it possible to enhance or modify some of the positions, like the community officer, and clarify us to be able to do some of this, because we're going to be adding an additional person? Because I believe that it's
probably more relevant for the city to add a position in engineering and public works than, just strictly for enforcement. So, I mean, I would like, what I suggest is to explore what is the scenario and what are the possibilities without necessarily going to the hiring, because we also have unions and we have negotiations, and then that has another level of complication. So, I mean, it is a priority because it comes to the level that we just have at least three permanent black situations in the city that we haven't been able to address at all, because this situation is that situation, or the people don't respond, or we cannot take legal action. But, you know, those three particular areas, businesses that have been somewhat abandoned and left at the mercy of Cloverdale, we need to address that.
Right. It's really a council priority. Just want to make sure that we articulate that, you know, by making a significant budget decision like hiring new personnel in this arena, that reflection, right?
So let me just interject one thought, you know, we have a good staff. You guys come back, you know what the concern is code enforcement and not getting addressed in a timely manner. So hiring a new person certainly would be somebody dedicated to it, but there may be other thoughts. Certainly, I think the code enforcement aspect, critical link, and come back with something else if you think there's something. I'm not aware of what urgent staffing needs we have out there. I'm not aware of what hiring this position over another position, the impact on the operation. What I am aware of, the community that we represent, the community is concerned over the lack of code enforcement and the time it takes to fix it. That's the concern. So just not addressing it isn't the answer. What I need is, how do we do this? And that's why I thought if we using the cannabis tax monies like we thought it was going to be used, but that money may be used in other areas today. But how do we do this? Because I don't want to just have it go away. We can't get to it. That's not an answer. So, I mean, I'm happy to do what I can to help it, but I just need you to kind of come back with our options. And that's, I think, where we're at with this.
Yeah, because that's not set in stone that we need to hire a code enforcer at this point in comparison to the needs that the city has. But we definitely need to have a plan on how to address it.
That's it, very good. Thank you so much. So if we could keep this on the agenda for next meeting and come back with some of what you think would be a workable plan. It may be something that through collateral duties could be picked up in a different way. Maybe by different people picking up different components. I don't know. But I just want to see a plan, that we have a proactive plan in place. Because it is a big concern in the community. It really is.
And when we have a heard from the chief.
Well, a lot of points have been covered already that I was going to address. You know, certainly, I think you brought up the three areas of life that are concerning. So I always look at the long term of hiring somebody like that. Once your life is taken care of, so major issues are done. Finally, recourse to this individual who's being paid as a full-time person to go and find other code enforcement related things. That doesn't always register well. So time is my experience of being here, and I'll cite the animal control contract with which is an excellent thing, mind you. But now the job is to go out and find code enforcement violations or animal control issues, things like that. So that's exactly what the full-time code enforcement officer, when those things are addressed, that we go and find these and hunt them down.
For compliance,
Right.
not necessarily the heavy animal enforcement. I just have to emphasize that.
Yeah, I get exactly where you're coming from, how the community identifies that sometimes results in it. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, and we will always, it's always been my philosophy, to kind of echo a few things that were said about, we have to make that person go out and find something to do. We start making progress on these issues of rights, that we have to go out. Make sure we're responsible, and we go around to the community and we find those issues of education.
Define a hybrid.
Well, that's why the duties of this particular position can encompass other areas as well, not just focus on code enforcement, but, for instance, the community service may do traffic control, as well as evidence processing, as well as court runs, and, you know, so you have a collage of duties that can fit, so you're getting the maximum use of one of those duties is that area. So, you guys, I know, have come up with a great plan.
And you know, another area that we don't talk very much about is, and we've discussed in the past, is that the housing. You know, knowing that people are living on tool sheds, that people are living in garages, that people are living exposed. And it's a catch-22 because we don't want to put people on the street. But at the same time, one needs to start thinking, how much of that are we going to allow in our community? And fortunately, there has been enough complaints that we've been able to save a few people. And I say save because these people have been in situations where a gas leak would have been enough for them to be there the next morning. Yeah. So, and there are people living in trailers that are in trees, without water, without any kind of that. And just because it happens doesn't mean that we need to turn our heads the other way. Right? It's a balancing act. So, do you have enough direction and conversation? We're not requesting anything drastic, something reasonable, and at the same time, that is kind of huge. We need to start working on this. Yes.
To the chair, would you like us to bring it back, or do you want to direct this to council? Bring it back.
No,
Yeah, I'd like it back here.
back here, yeah, you're not right.
No. Thank you.
Now, the next, schooling learning center policy. This is something that has been happening elsewhere, and I guess Cloverdale never had a schooling or learning center. Is that correct? So this,
During the fires, we got.
so that would be something to follow.
Yeah.
So as you know, with the city of Cloverdale, we be giving us what kind of things, in what kind of situations the city of Cloverdale has to address. And given what we were just talking about, the lack of infrastructure for some people in the community, and also many people that do not have air conditioning and are in need of a cooling center or water center on this. This came about because we had actually almost 4 days of heat that we finally opened for today. And I appreciate your efforts, Kevin, in searching for what kind of policy has been established and you David, throughout the county and also in some of the cities. So what is your thought about this? David?
I just want to reflect what's in the packet, or what was then subsequent to release of the packet. It's, you know, your request, Mayor, we added a debrief from reflects the after action review, kind of as we call it a hot wash, from the cooling center event that happened Saturday, Sunday, July 10th and 11th, along with the host of other related information that reflects the culmination of the research that we've done for cooling centers. So included in the information regarding this item is a after action review that highlights kind of the policy that the subcommittee can consider if they'd like to proceed and move forward, that would kind of set forth, some guidance for when when a cooling center might be established, under what parameters. But I guess a couple things just to talk about really that's an outcome of the debrief process, which there was really 4 key issues that were identified, well, technically 5. First of which was, activation guidelines, and the need to develop policy to determine, when to activate a cooling or warming center. I want to note, just because of the activity that occurred, it really, at this point, really focused on a cooling center, not so much a warming center. So additional work would need to be kind of added to address, what are the key parameters for a warming center. But, as part of that, identifying, what are the key sites that we would want to identify for our cooling center. The ones that kind of come to mind include the Citrus Fair, the Veterans Hall, the library, and the senior center. And I think almost each one of those might have its own kind of site-specific criteria. Again, we've been working, when I say we, staff, and particularly the chief, at developing and building this collaboration partnership with Citrus Fair to serve more formally as our care and shelter branch of our emergency operations center. For a long time, we've really just haven't had a formal relationship whatsoever. So they've been a great partner and worked with the community and kind of did what needed to get done to utilize the Citrus Fair, bring the volunteers together. It's always been done really on an informal basis, but we realized there's a big fire. There's kind of a limit to that. There's a need for funding, there's a need for more volunteers, there's a need for more organization, and of course, there's a whole bunch of other things that we identified that kind of need to be done to accommodate a true kind of care and shelter branch for EOC. So what's included in here is draft guidelines. We also, as part of the debrief, we have a tremendous need for volunteers. Again, this comes from the perspective that if there is an activated EOC, senior staff are going to be participating in the Emergency Operations Center and taking on those key roles through that that are set up or established through the ICS system. So we need to have that base of volunteers in our community again that kind of develop through the care and shelter branch, serve as volunteers, and provide the necessary staffing for the cooling centers. That was from key feedback. Another item that we learned is really the need to establish an emergency services budget as part of our budget. We even learned that during the KK fire, there was a tremendous need to have access to funding for various needs that arose in the community. And of course, that was an emergency event that was, was declared by the state, and we knew we were going to get reimbursed. So that at least enabled us to expend funds to be able to seek reimbursement. But we also know that with these cooling events, these warming events, they're not all going to be state designated disasters or federal designated disasters, but we may have expenses that come up, for instance, for food expenses or water, depending on what level of service we provide, or there may be needs for some limited supplies. So having that budget in place just helps facilitate us being able to operate cooling centers. And along with that is again getting kind of the supply box ready to put having that ready to go so that we need to activate quickly, we can do that. And then so the last issue that we identified during the debrief was this kind of relates to the volunteers is the whole pre-event site assessment setup. we know there tends to be, for lack of a better word, administrative work that needs to get done to address what the event might be, whether it's the convention hall insurance, or there may be activities there that you need to kind of plan around, that we know is fair that we're having events there weekly. So we may need to figure out how a pool center or a world center can be established when there's other activities being planned or proposed. And it gets you back to the sites, looking at, I think, for instance, there's a willingness for the library to serve under certain operational parameters. So how do we roll our partners into this to help establish maybe less formally a cooling site, a cooling location that can also provide a nice alternative to maybe more big formal cooling center. So some of that stuff we learned and we were able to address as part of our setup for the cooling center, and captured in the documentation. First and foremost is the policy. Ultimately, I think that's something we need to get support for by subcommittee, bring to council to consider formal adoption of the policy, and along with that, a budget that maybe is more broad that covers other types of emergency events. Right now, we don't specifically have a budget for like emergency events per se, or these types of activities. So it may be something we want to align in the budget for us to give us some flexibility to staff up or support these types of activities. So I'm going to pause there. There's a lot here. That we had a lot of support by the Homesy family with their expertise and their guidance, and working in a Cisco community where, in addition to just developing policy guidelines, they've developed programs for cooling centers that reflect, kind of cultural competence, making sure that you're addressing the specific populations that you may need to serve. In our community, we know the Latinx population is an important member of our community. We want to make sure we have bilingual materials, cover volunteers, Spanish, and then how do we make sure we engage the whole community in understanding, when are we staffing these events, or staffing these facilities, when, timing, all the kind of informational aspects of opening and closing a cooling center.
I thought you did a great job. There was just a couple of areas that were not included, and that was the outreach to the public beyond Mexico. And that's something that needs to be included in the plan, because then the other thing was that we had touched upon coordinating with the county, and we did reach out to Ryan Harvey, because if we cannot follow the policy of money at this moment, that would be an alternative until we get some policy going. Just like they did the losses for the fire, maybe to do that until we have something as such. We also talked about the transportation internally, and we had mentioned that people could take the local bus. If we were either at the senior center, the library, or the veterans hall, those are three stops of the local bus. So it's perfect if somebody wanted to come to any of those places during a heat wave. And then you mentioned, okay, in a couple of places we talk about animals, and in one says these spaces are activated being considered the risk of feed to animals, vulnerable populations, and population in general. But then in another part it says that no animals will be allowed. So it's contradicting, and this one comes directly from the Hillsborough guidelines, which I read.
And so, yeah, so it says here, service animals are made in the center, then the other one is non-animals other than, and that's on page, well, this is the addition. So, and you know, when we open up, we have praise for all sorts of animals. So maybe it should be, you know, if we are going to consider this, we should say that animals are permitted in addition to certain animals, if there is an appropriate praise for them, because that's one of the reasons why it's activated, because it's dangerous to animals and people. And nowadays, just about everybody has a dog or a cat. And we have a lady who came with her 2 dogs. And she brought her a crate, but we have to look at it for her. So that's an area that I felt needs to be addressed. And then, the other issue that I mentioned to you was the fact that, there might be problems with personnel, personnel issues. If we're going to depend on volunteers, when it's not a state or a county emergency, how are we going to make sure that we don't, you know, violate any of those things? So something to be taken into account.
Yeah, and one thing I think it's important to be aware of is I think ultimately the county through the Department of Emergency Management will bring forward guidelines that they'll ask us as part of an operational area to adopt for our overall emergency operations plan. I think what they've provided was the fact that it's the draft. And so we should just keep that in the back of our mind that there's going to be more than likely a kind of a county-wide annex to our emergency operations plan, and then for us to then kind of provide specificity on how we'd like to see them maintained in our center, but we don't want to be too inconsistent. You know, we want to see consistency, but provide more details where we might differentiate or have different program elements. I think the animal one is kind of one that is an area where we can have differentiated guidance. And it's a little confusing because I think this is where we have to thought into, you know, what facility might be activated. For instance, I think the vegetable is perfect. And, you know, we had the crates, and that's great. Maybe the library, if they were set up, they may not allow animals. So that might be something where we might want to say, you know, depending on the site.
Yeah.
You know, to build that flexibility so that if need be, and if we notice we need to activate the library and you're willing to do so, maybe that location again, I don't know this, but it might be more reticent to allow animals. So,
Yeah, well, it's just something to keep in mind.
right. So to have
How
that,
it meets all the requirements and all the goals of all the different agencies that interact in situations like this. Okay, and but I'm most concerned about issues of personnel, because I want to make sure that we don't get in trouble with any union or with any giving any commands to, you know, I don't want to make it any more difficult for you dealing with the personnel.
right. So I think what I hear, Madam Mayor, is that your interest is if it's not a state or local emergency, that city staff the school, right? And then therefore figuring out
If
who
you
is,
request anybody to do so, that we do it according to the law.
and that's just an area I need to consult, you know, job descriptions and determine, you know, again, if it's a declared emergency, everybody's can call anybody to work to do it. It's a job under the Social Services Act. If it's not an emergency, I'm much more limited in my ability to just assign people to work a cooling center, you know, especially if they're on a weekend. You know, for instance, when this event happens, that we're expecting a number of my staff that, you know, they're gone on the weekends, or they're, you know, it came up very quickly on Friday evening as it developed. So I, you know, have limitations on what I can
That's how we jump in. But, I just want to make sure that it doesn't infringe so much upon you and the staff. But that there is some representation from the city, participation, I don't know, what do you think?
Well, in these types of programs, we used to have the emergency operations command through the county. And I go back when I was in Hillsburg, and we were all deputized, and we had a lot of volunteers in the community that was facilitated through county. And that kind of went away. But it seems like what I'd like to see is if we can reach out. We have a large retirement community here. A lot of them would be willing to get engaged a little bit and find a volunteer coordinator who can work to try to figure out what we need and go out into the community and try to get a pool of people that we can train to fulfill some of those roles. Because volunteer is going to be critical into this thing. I don't think we can rely on city staff. And I think getting somebody who's willing to take on a role and work with our management team to go out to the Del Webs, to go out to the service clubs, to go out to the different our fire volunteer program, to kind of start putting together a little presentation, and that we can get volunteers to sign on board, what their qualifications are, what their availability would be, and put the plan together in that regard, as well as, like David mentioned, with the different potential sites, what would be allowed, what wouldn't be allowed, and what we need to do to activate it. So, but getting people in place is probably the first link, because without the people, no matter what, we really can't function.
Yeah, and I think that's what changing Martini, right?
I think the, right, part of the larger goal, and thinking about this through the lens of our overall emergency preparedness program, is to, develop that volunteer base. Part of it, and I look at this activity as part of that care and shelter branch of the DOC. And under that branch, really, that's where the reliance on volunteers is to have that base group of volunteers that we can activate pretty quickly to be able to serve the volunteer staff. And it's more than just volunteering. There's training that goes along with it, which CPR, first aid, and general training on cooling center operations or warming center, amongst other things. And so, that's, I think, what's key is continuing to develop that volunteer base and working, coordinating with Jim. He's been doing a great job, and I know he's found challenges trying to just, everybody's busy. He's just trying to get that group of folks
And
ready.
don't interrupt you, but that's kind of what I was going to, is everybody is busy with multiple things, and if you identify a person who, more than likely retired, has the ability, willing to put in the time, that would be, that would be ideal. And that's kind of what they did at the county level years ago, was through a volunteer program, working with their EOC, and it worked out well back then, but that goes back many years. And that's going away. But on a smaller scale, if we have the right individual working with, Jim Martini is coming up and working with these different groups and talking to them and getting, who's prepared and willing and what do they provide. Is there training needs, working with the fire district for CPR, first aid, put together a plan for the volunteers. But you got to get the volunteers on board first, and that's all. So it takes an outreach effort, and that takes a lot of time. And quite honestly, I don't know if our staff has that kind of time to do that. So that's why finding somebody willing to take that on.
At the beginning of the city in Cloverdale last year, all the service groups were there. And then, I guess they felt that we were getting on a big wheel somewhat, and they kind of went away. But I think it's time to go back and say, okay, we finally had our first run, and this is what happened, and this is what we discovered.
And, you know, I am willing to go to some of these meetings again, and what we should also do is remind them, hey, you guys were here last year, we want to invite you back, because now we do have some task assignments to make, and to bring back the Rotary, to bring back the Lions, the Kiwanis, etc. And I'll be happy to work on some of these outreach with I'm gonna tell them that we need to get those names again. And I'll be making phone calls, and someone will be making phone calls to make sure they come back, so that we can come up with a plan for volunteers. Because this is the basic link that we need in order to get anything going. Because if we don't have that support, we don't have the personnel, we don't have the human resource, we cannot really achieve as much as we like. And it's okay for us to volunteer and to do what we might not necessarily hear. And the good thing that David mentioned is that there is a meeting week ahead of any event that will let us know if there's going to be an eating event or a cooling event or something as such. So that gives us a little bit of time to plan. But before that comes, we need to really get this in order.
So could I make just a quick suggestion?
Yeah.
In the short term would be for just a little bit of a paragraph of what we're trying to do, and that maybe get it into the Down Web newsletter, as well as the senior center. They put out a newsletter, as well as maybe Cloverdale Connect, that we're looking to put together a volunteer program to deal with staffing a cooling center and other unpredicted emergency, and we're looking for a volunteer coordinator who will devote time to help develop the program. And the seniors that read this, there's a lot of well-qualified people that may say, you know, I got nothing but time, I'd love to take that on. And, you know, and then contact information, who would be the person for them to talk to. And see if we can generate some interest of volunteer kind of work. Yeah, and to go out into the community and already have to help nurture that plan.
And I'll be happy to also share that with the different nonprofits in town.
Good start.
So I think that would be a good start, yeah. And this is something that we're going to continue to rehash, but I think it's a very good start, David, and what we put together here.
Yeah, I think it looks really good.
Yeah.
I did want to mention, I put in the policy that the senior center, I meant to say that the cooling center, which, you know, example could be the senior center. I just want to make sure that if the senior center reads this, that they don't think we are designating them as our only cooling center.
Oh, no.
That was not the intent. I got an email from Rebecca who pointed that out. And they insisted, you know, as the senior center, city cooling center. So I think it's really developing the list of locations that can serve, and maybe what are the key parameters for each one of those locations would be kind of a useful next step. Certainly the senior center could be a great spot, maybe dedicated to seniors, for example, on how they.
And, you know, I think I mentioned that we could also talk to the management of the family apartment to see if that would be an additional place. So, but this is very good. Thank you.
And the other option would be too, is to talk to the school district. To see if we can, they have several gyms and different large facilities. And again, I would think those would become important if we have rolling blackouts, where now you have a lot of people without air conditioning. And it's a very hot and smoky, they're going to be looking for something.
Right.
Preferably places that are on generator backup.
And what we did as part of the Zinc Cloverdale initiative from was that very issue came up with, you know, offering these events for a couple of PSDS, and through working with Citrus Fair, PG&E, and Jeff Peters, the that's something we deliberately work with them to, part of the thing we're interested in, to get that in place, because we know that, we know we were directly impacted in K fire, because we lost out gas and electricity, we were calling to establish a shelter. Of course, there's a lot more to it, but, we really couldn't, because there was no lighting, we couldn't do it safely. Standard.
And
Having that backup power is critical. We were even thinking about that in this event, because there was a concern about the rolling block house, and what if we established the veterans hall and need power, what, switch over to the citrus there, they had a number of events going on, so it got really got kind of tricky pretty quickly. So those are all things we have to kind of be cognizant of, and of course, part of what we've been doing is trying to figure out, can we get back the power at the senior center? I know they're interested in the PG&E grant. Can we I know they're going to do backup generation at the veterans hall. So getting all those pieces in place, so we have a more resilient, with less ability to utilize these events.
And Councilmember Lamb, Vice Mayor Lamb mentioned that the school was coming back.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a problem. Okay, well, I
Thank
think-
you for your work on this.
and I think the next thing would be to get that invitation to reach out to the nonprofit. And we're not ready to bring this to council yet, but what happens in the event that something like this happens in the next month? I guess we have better guidance on this.
Well, there is definitely draft there. I mean, if we certainly share it with council just for an informal review, if support that mayor and Paul, otherwise it's not official policy. I mean, it would be official policy for council adopts it, but
Information?
information.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe we can touch up on those things that we said and present it as something that is happening and that we might need to consider in the near future.
Mayor, if you want to share with me your, any comments, I'll clean it up. I know I got it out pretty quickly, so I did see some errors in there that I'd like to clean it myself. Get your input and
Oh, yeah.
and my quick comment over there.
I'll share that.
We can at least just share it with the council members, say a draft, and we're doing more work to build the logistics around having a cooling center. We would propose bring this forward at some point already.
Yeah, if you could, when you do, make it just for information purposes on no action and welcome it. So they could give you input at that meeting. I love it, or I would like to see this, so we could get that information and bring it back. And I just have one follow-up question on the insurance issue. Did we check with our self-insured to determine if we open an emergency shelter like that, we are covered, we should be covered under our pool? It's a city-sponsored event, but I would like to get confirmation on that. We may, and it should be available anywhere, because for the reason we all spoke about, we may not get the library, we may have to go to the Grange Hall. So we really need to have if there's an emergency situation where we have to open up, our insurance should cover that. And I think it will. I think when you check, but it's good to check.
Right. I think I think you're right, Councilmember. If we as a city open a facility or taking an action, we would be covered by our policy. It's more of, for instance, the veterans hall through the county was asking for our insurance certificate. In that case,
We may need to get it.
we have to get an agreement with them to that provides whatever language they need on this. As long as it's a little bit of administrative.
Whatever.
I won't go into detail, but.
So what did they ever tell you afterwards?
Well, it's a bunch of the veterans hall, because we have an agreement with them for the pool, we have insurance. They were okay. We technically have the same umbrella coverage carrier if they do. So, but with that said, our general manager at CRS did say, you really want to have an agreement that has insurance that backs up the language in the agreement. But the county basically said, for what you want to do this weekend, we're kind of, it's an emergency. We feel like we have sufficient documentation in place to address this weekend. Right. That's the kind of pre-work that we want to kind of get done in advance.
And, do you want to go ahead with the American Rescue Plan and then the chief?
That's a few there. Or how you want to see.
You want to go?
That's what you'd like me to do.
Okay, go ahead, let's give David a break.
Okay. You've got a lot of these on there, don't you think? Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I submitted a memo with some attachments a while back. I hope you have the opportunity to take a look at them. Basically, what I'm looking to do here is restructure the technical services manager position and create a dispatch supervisor position. Mostly because of the amount of caseload and workload that the technical service manager has brought on. A lot of that has been as a result of new legislation, use of force legislation, a lot of things that Public Records Act is now requesting. Citizens have the opportunity to request similar information. So the records management functions have really increased within the last year. And to give you a better perspective, I think page 54 of the document kind of lines out a lot of what the records technical service manager does right now, just from the records standpoint. So in addition to that caseload, she's also in charge of 6 dispatchers who report directly to her. There are several responsibilities that come with the supervisor position. She has to do evaluations, counseling, discipline if necessary, scheduling, training for vacations, training illnesses. There's all kinds of things, and she's often having to sit in a console at times when somebody's out and they don't have to that. So she's also had to do that. When you see the combination of what she does, she's really limited now due to a lot of these increases in records retention as well as public records requests. An example, one of the ones we got right fairly soon after use of force came out was a request for every single officer's crisis intervention training, which is intervention training, dating all the way back to every officer in the department to when they began. So that's pretty intensive. You have to look at all the training records. You have to find each individual officer and locate all crisis intervention training that they have had over the years. So it's time consuming, it's lengthy, and because of those increases, she's dedicating 75% of her time to records management and about 20% to 5% in supervision. To no fault of her own, when we lack in supervision, we have challenges. And that's currently what we're facing, which is kind of why I wanted to look at restructuring this and reclassifying her position to exclusively the records management position, and then promote from within a dispatcher to a true dispatch supervisor that would then handle all of the dispatch functions. So in addition to the memo, there's some attachments that address what the cost for promoting one dispatcher to a dispatcher supervisor would be. And it's broken down similar to how a police officer and police sergeant are on a scale of 5 steps. So in the end, what you'll find is we compared the similar approaches from the police officer to the steps to the sergeant. And that's equals about an 18% difference. So then we looked at it from a dispatch perspective of a new dispatcher talked out to a supervisor, dispatch supervisor would be. And it's about 15% difference, which is about right considering being non-sworn versus sworn individuals. But what this also does is it provides an opportunity for one of the dispatchers for growth now, there is really no growth in the dispatcher. They're pretty much stuck in that building, inside. They can't leave, they can't do anything. There's minimal amounts of training dispatchers have. At best, we can try to get more advancements to a dispatch supervisor school, and get a bit more understanding of what a dispatch supervisor does that applies to their dispatch position. But this really does create an advancement opportunity that they're just not going to have. I have a dispatcher that's been there almost 30 years, and the opportunity to get supervised just doesn't exist. So I think opening up that opportunity is really going to change a little bit of the dynamic there. As far as morale, it'll really help, because when you have supervisory challenges, it has a tendency to lower morale. It's concerning, and because I already have two supervisors that are running a patrol division. So when I talk about how much the technical services manager has to do, she has to also oversee those 6. Well, I've got 2 sergeants in patrol that oversee 9 people. So, that's about 4.5 people we have to do evaluations on to finish this scheduling. So she's got to do everything she does, and then deal with 6 dispatchers to do all of that. And I have 2 supervisors in patrol to deal with 9 people. So it's quite a load for her to handle. And that's why you see all the attachments that I have should outline a job description for separating those 2 and reclassifying it to simply a records manager, and then you would have a dispatch supervisor, and the job descriptions are listed in there. And overall, when it's all said and done, top step dispatcher to a dispatch supervisor, top step, the difference annually is $10,400 over to the insurance benefits remain the same. So you're looking at just the cost difference from a salary standpoint to a supervisor on a top step dispatcher. So
Yeah, that's one thing I just wanted to make sure is clear. I think this request is not a new position. It's really it's a new title, but we're not proposing to add a new person. It's really to create a path for 6 dispatchers to have compete for the supervisor position. So typically you go from 6 dispatchers to 5 dispatchers and 1 supervising dispatcher.
it still works cost, right? Nothing changes in the role. However, now they have the additional responsibility of supervising the 5, doing the scheduling, doing the evaluations, going through the process of if and when discipline is necessary, how that works, and all of the elements that go with that. Removing that off the shoulders of the technical service manager.
I've got a question. What would be the timeline to be able to go from 1, 2, 3, 4 steps?
So typically, the way this works, just about everybody that's working in the dispatch center now has multiple years on. Don't have anybody that's technically quote unquote new. So ideally, what you would do is look at who's being promoted and probably try to get them in the 3rd step range of the supervisor, because they wouldn't be able to start below where they're currently making. And there's some there that they're here at top step. So going to the 1st step, the supervisor would make it less than that, right? So we need to bring them in on the 3rd step, then they go a year, they're promoted to the 4th step, then they go another year, get the 5% for the 5th top step. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think
But
Mayor,
it's only a year?
yeah, between steps.
Between steps would be a year between steps, yes. So let's, on a hypothetical, if I had let's say a senior dispatcher, top down, and managed to get promoted to the supervisor position, we wouldn't bring them in any less than what they're making now. So they'd have to come in and then advance up the next year to a step, ending with the following year to the top step. Because that way they get a raise each year in a normal step progression, like police steps are, sergeant steps are, when interest in every year they get steps. Myself included, I'm just getting my 5th step, August 5th. So that's how that would work. I hope that answers it correctly for you.
That's a practice.
That's
That's how it works for all.
Yeah, everybody.
Well, I think just a couple of the comments. I think it's a good move. I think it's probably long overdue. The records manager position is extremely demanding. And now with the Public Records Act and all the due requirements, it's just taken on a life of its own. Certainly, I think having a dedicated supervisor that's responsible, somebody that you can hold accountable to do their job, to hold the dispatchers accountable, is critical. And it's hard to do that when you have somebody that's got so many different tasks that by no fault of their own, they just can't get to it. And it's not the way you operate in law enforcement, or any, especially in law enforcement, because, you know, there's a lot of case law out there. Your inability to supervise is not a defense. I'm sure
Absolutely.
the inappropriate action. So, you know, from a liability standpoint, it's critical. Save that. So I support this.
In order to advance this, we need to bring it to council with a resolution creating the position that would be adopting the job classification along with a budget amendment to reflect these.
Well, the budget amendment would be for just this fiscal year, which would be a small amount. Because the full next year, when you do the budget, you calculate it. Because the steps would start, it would just be for this year, right? So the amendment would be the full 10,000.
Yeah, we have to look at, I mean, we often do.
Right.
policy.
I believe so. Follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I totally understand. And if we have to kind of prorate.
Prorate.
Yeah. for the,
Yeah. Because you wouldn't put 10,000. This
Right.
It may be 4,000, and then another 4, and then another.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
So when do you think that can go?
All. So we're sitting at the out of the council.
No, that's, I meant to the council.
Probably what's the next
September.
11th, September.
Let's see.
We've got our forward calendar pretty set for the next meeting in August. And that's what I would suggest, Jesus. We target the first meeting in September. Okay.
We'll go back to the American Rescue Plan.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Vice Chair, I have a couple items to share with you. This is just an overview of the coronavirus state level fiscal recovery fund, which is part of the American Rescue Plan. And I'll turn it over to our finance director. She's going to give you a little bit of an overview of what we've received to date through ARPA, what the funds can be used for, some of the work that our finance director has done in terms of looking at our lost revenue, which you can see in your package, includes the calculator. And then we'll seek your any questions or comments you might have, and then your feedback on how you'd like us to proceed and how you might want to bring this to the council. I'll turn it over to Susie. I'll just hand you these.
So the ARPA funds, we received 1.3 million.
That's for the first year.
Yeah, that's.
Well, 1,035,000.
Thank you. You're right. It is 1.35 million. We're expected to receive 2 million.
Another 2 million or what?
No, one more.
One
One
more.
more, you got it.
Oh, so.
Yeah, I know. We received that July 13th. And we've created a separate account, funding account, so we can account for it. It won't be just in the general fund. Some of the things that we can use the funds for are previously for our essential personnel, which would be our safety workers. There's that. We can pay for essential workers if we can note that 50% of their time or more is spent on COVID-19. this activity, yeah. We can do the households and small businesses. And then the other thing was that we could take in our revenue that was lost through the general fund. We did do the calculator that was issued by the League of California Cities. And what I've come up with is that we didn't actually lose any revenue because they consider all revenues, even developer fees, impact fees, everything is included in revenue. Any grants, unless they're federal grants, we did exclude federal grants, but any grants had to be included. So when we calculate all that out, we actually received more money in our base year than what we would get. So yeah, that the handout that David just gave you and breaks out how we can support the health expenditures, the direct negative economic impact. Of course, there's water, wastewater, and broadband. I think we won't do that. But yeah, if you want to invest in that infrastructure. I just want to add also that any investment that we do in water and wastewater will later reduce the rates that our water and wastewater pay. So reduce customer rates. You can use it.
Yeah,
And how is that?
yeah, I think the mechanism that might occur is for instance, as part of our rate study, the rates are funding certain capital improvement projects. If council earmarks this funding, and there's not a lot there, to be honest. I mean, it's $1 million, and it's really grateful that the federal government provides this economic relief. But if you, let's say, earmark that to a capital improvement project that is funded by rate, well, in theory, it would reduce that cost and therefore be able to offset rate increases. The project that can be funded through rates is funded through our budget. That's probably a scenario if dedicated the full tranche, let's say, to a capital improvement project that was specified to be paid for by rates. So this is something we can look at once the council decides how you'd like it to, how council would like to see these funds be utilized for. And, if it is very broad, it's water and sewer. It may not be a project that we identify as a CIP that is funded by customer rates. So it gets a little complicated, but I guess it's just to kind of make sure that we reflect that. There are members in our community that are asking about us trying to get as much grant funds as we can to offset those CIP costs to help reduce rates.
So do you have a list of CIP initiatives that would fall within this $1 million?
I'm sure we do. I don't have it with me today, but yeah.
But that
Definitely.
would be, we don't need to see it all. We just need to see the ones that you have specifically identified as the rate, and then we can consider that. If it's within that amount of money.
Right. And of course, the council can divide this funding up as you see fit within the guidance. So it may offset a certain percentage of the cost, maybe not the full cost of the project.
Right.
In which case, the rates are still going to be necessary to help fund, those projects. Depending on the timing of the project and when we move the CIP project forward. But I think part of this conversation, kind of the related component to this And so, council may want to think about it in the context of using some of this funds to meld with some of that funding to fund the project maybe completely, or to use it for other purposes and use the infrastructure money to fund the infrastructure project. So there's more, the nice thing is there's several options on the table from council. And of course, there's a lot of unmet needs out there, and there are things for which we have not necessarily developed or included in our CIP that we know need to get that. I mean, a good example of that, I think, I don't remember Paul and I talked about it, funding some of the drainage work on Times Square, for example. I don't know that we didn't, that's not a CIP project, at least not in terms of water and sewer, it's a water project because it's drainage, but it's not a project for which we were planning to carry out in the water system or by the water utility. It was a drainage improvement that involves water that kind of divided.
Now, my question there is, does it have to be public related? Because I read a lot of the restrictions on this funding. Does so the drainage one, would it have to comply with any of this COVID requirements?
First, but I think the utilizing the funding kind of broadly for infrastructure, if it's water or sewer or broadband, it doesn't have to be necessarily related. I mean, some things for I think for consideration too is a number of cities are looking at how can we bolster our general fund, and there's obviously there's some restrictions here about revenue, it's been to offset revenue. Of course, we were in a position where we really could, through the work that Susie did, identify a significant reduction in the revenue. And really, that's why the date here is so important, March 11, 2021. The way the bill looks, it's not really, it doesn't really look back, it looks forward. So it's saying, going forward, how are you going to pay for these things, these six things, and how can you use the funding for that purpose? So what some of these cities are doing, for instance, to help the general fund, is to look at what expenses maybe the police department may have, what expenses maybe the planning department or the finance department have over this period of time going forward, and supplanting, paying for those expenses in those budgets, thereby offsetting some of the general fund revenue expenses. So it helps kind of, you're offsetting general fund expenditures, and that's the way you're really generating general fund savings by funding some of those expenses using American Relief Plan Act funds, rather than just simply putting it in your general fund budget.
So if I could just make a few comments. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I look at this money as, I just don't think it would be in the city, and I'm talking about our community's best interest, to try to offset some of the expenses, throw it in the general fund and use it that way. I think maybe some of it in that way would be healthy. But I look at it more as an opportunity to do something for the community for the next 20 to 50 years, get things in place. There's a huge need for our medical facilities. That's been talked about for over 10 years. It's been on hold for a number of issues, as well as our school district trying to expand. There's major concerns over enough space for the students, and as we continue to grow as a city, do we have adequate classrooms? And it's just, everybody's struggling. I kind of look at this as an opportunity to look at one-time funding to make something happen that's going to be here for 50 years. And that's getting a medical center in place that's fully operable, where we have mental health services as well as other county services as part of that. We're sitting in a building that through the redevelopment agency that we built right here. This wouldn't be here if we didn't take that initiative in the community. This building's here for 50 years. The performing arts, where we meet, was something we did, that was redevelopment. And we tried to pick projects that were going to serve the community for a long, long time, and they're there. People welcome it, they love the performing arts. The community museum, all those happened because of redevelopment. Not to mention all the different facade things and things we did throughout the city. So you look at those, and I'm looking at this as a very small amount of money, but it's significant enough that if we could resolve that storm drainage thing and make that happen as a flair, collaborating with, again, another nonprofit, meaning the Alexander Valley Health, and the school, nonprofit, all struggling with the classroom. Get that road, which we desperately need, get the drainage in place. It would open up a lot of doors to put that to bed, and we could start moving forward. They could start making, hopefully getting their grants in place, because they have a lot of funding resources available to them to get that state-of-the-art medical center built. And we could see something that's going to be here for the next 50 to 60 years. It's going to serve our community. And so I'm looking at this as an opportunity to try to put in place something that's going to be long-term for the whole community better. Putting in, we talked about the Measure B cannabis tax. You know, where'd that money go? Well, it ended up in the general fund, but as we talked about funding a position, that was kind of the intent. We don't have money, we have other needs. Yeah, so once it gets commingled, it tends to kind of lose its focus. And I think it's important that this is such a major impact to our community, having this in place long-term, that we don't want to lose that opportunity, because if we don't, I question in my mind if we'll see a medical center here. So I think that's really, we need to be a player. That's my thoughts on it. I would like to see us at least carve out a piece of this to make that happen. We need the street, we need the drainage, and Times Square, whether the community center walks away, or the health center walks away tomorrow, which I know they won't, they're very anxious, but if they did, we still need that in place for that property that the city still possesses. So
Well,
that's
it's only 2 million, to be
Well-
something, that doesn't go that far.
right, but it will do a big job on the store.
On the storm drain, I don't think you would do the road, because it also requires a improvement. And perhaps something to consider. I think in terms of public health and economic impact, it would also be able to be serving the senior center in terms of the mental health aspect. So it would be appropriate to see what projects could be addressed with this, because it sounds like one that is really useful for a lot, something to get going. I definitely believe that it would help somehow with the Alexander Valley Health, but I wouldn't put all my eggs on that particular project.
No, and again, just to clarify, it's not to help them, it's to put the road in, which would be a city road and the drainage, which the city is asking them to pay for, like you would a private company, a private contractor for profit. That's what we do. This is not a for-profit, this is a nonprofit that serves all the community, whether you have the ability to pay or not. And it's a community asset for the community, nonprofit. So I think collaborating and being a partner in those kinds of agreements makes more sense. If this was a for-profit project, I would feel strongly different. But again, schools are not for profit. The Alexander Valley Health is a not for profit. The city's not for profit. We'll collaborate and make something happen.
And how does that impact perhaps in the district fair private road? Because that is a private road. And
Well,
how does this come into play? I need to see the whole
Well,
picture.
yeah, Kevin, I'll just jump in here on this one. One of the things that the city is taking the lead on and trying to address this stormwater issue that's related to future development of Times Square, but also there's an existing inadequate storm drainage.
Yeah. I want about the
Right.
district server, that's
So,
the question.
part of the proposed design that Relgy and Race has developed does identify storm drain improvements along the southern edge of Fair Drive. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Okay.
So where the storm drain is proposed to be located would be on the Times Square property. Ideally, there will be some construction easements that would be obtained from Citrus Fair to be able to at least perform those improvements in Citrus Fair Drive. Otherwise, they're going to have to all be done from Times Square. So that's something we've been working on with the Citrus Fair the director. Work with her on how we get her board see if they would support either a temporary construction easement or ideally dedication of additional right of way or Citrus Fair Drive for both egress for the wellness center, but also to do all the factor improvements that we otherwise could be able to do for that process.
Yeah, because that's a key part of any improvement that takes place there. Because you would also need access to make sure that there are sidewalks and appropriate entry and so on. As long as there's an arrangement and some sort of agreement to keep there, the school, Alexander Valley Health and the city, then I would say it would be worth it. If it's gonna become a legal nightmare, then that's another situation.
The guidance that I've been told in terms of funding is specific to water and sewer and broadband. And the question has come up about roads and streets, and the answer thus far has been it's not a permitted use of the funds for street improvements. Now, granted, if you have to dig a trench and pave it over, but part of that should.
Yeah.
But in terms of new roads itself,
Yeah, this would just be for the storm drain.
right.
But you still need to get access to just there to be able to get that range.
Yeah, it's kind of a technical engineering question. I have to defer to our engineering consultant on how the work would actually be performed and what kind of construction easements and so forth are necessary to actually to construct the storm drain. That'd be part of if this was a city-led project, that would be part of our bid specs that we could develop is how the construction is going to actually occur and whether we have the right to access fair drive in some form or fashion. Hopefully that can be negotiated, but that's going to be something that coordinate fair. Some other things I think to consider is, as Suzie alluded, we got our first tranche. We may or may not want to count on the second tranche. There's some discussion we've heard from Congress that there may be some reallocation. So I'm always of the opinion that let's not count it till we have it. But we got the first tranche. It's in our bank account, and we've properly budgeted for it. So it's sitting there, and it's ready for council discussion on how we want to prioritize those monies in accordance with the guidance. Some other thoughts would be we put together a menu of items, including infrastructure, so we could identify drainage work at Times Square. There had been an interest, and we were working on up to the point when COVID hit was bringing in broadband services, both City Hall, Police Department. There was an expense to do that work. So we have a redundancy in our internet system, bringing fiber. And that would, in essence, help out downtown by bringing that fiber, continue to extend it for other businesses to then their point of connection is that much closer. That's clearly something that could be funded. So that's another potential project. I don't think the expenses there are significant, but funded with the labor groups. And it's premium pay. Besides police, we did have public works that were essential as well. So there might be some carve out in terms of that, offsetting some of that cost. And then there's looking at what other projects and activities council may want to fund. We know the senior center has been providing a response to COVID, and I think they're going to continue that. Do task force work. Again, of course, there's strings to it in terms of the use of the funds, but that may be we're going to do a funding agreement with senior center. So there's some things we can look at offsetting some of our expenses in addition to funding some of I can't remember quality, but funding the long-term infrastructure that could be benefited.
And if we do offset or don't give a portion of it to a nonprofit, it's still the city's responsibility to audit those funds, make sure that they spend them within, the reasonable,
Right, yeah.
exactly. So that's something to keep in mind that
Well, we want to do that anyway.
we give, yeah. And one more item that we might want to consider is the, we started putting in the new meters for each of the waters, so that we can read them with radio read, and then that would go a long way for getting us to be able to use it. Not radio read, but the automatic read, where you can go and check your data.
Those, again, I don't want to reiterate too far, but I mean, those are all very valuable programs, but the long term of a health center to me is critical. And the way it operates now, it's almost, it's so unfortunate. They're spread out throughout the city, they're cramped, there's not enough services, we can't even get mental health up here because there's no place to go. And I think we deserve as a community a good, solid medical facility that has us all the services we need here in town, not having to go to San Jose or lab work and this. So it's just something I'd like to see that list, the menu items put together, because obviously I think we all have ideas, and the sooner we can get the menu, the sooner we can start maybe seeing if we can get a consensus on what comes. I'd like to just kind of get your gut feeling of the timeline that might be available. And the menu, I'd hope, would also show the best, the cost of whatever the project is, out of the 1.2, what was it, 1.2 now? Is it a 1.35? So if we're talking on the storm drain, for instance, what do we see the dollar? And then, for the water things, what's that?
I think we could bring something to council. Again, we're pretty stacked up for this next meeting in August, but maybe that first meeting in September, we could have that menu prepared and ready to present to council with some suggestions.
Yeah, and if you need more time, I'm just saying, just to kind of get a ballpark, so we kind of keep it on target. Because I think there's so many needs, and all these are good needs. It's just a matter of how do we prioritize. And it would be helpful too to see the second round, even though we wouldn't want to comment, but how some of these may, if we decide not to fund them the first round, potentially the second round, so we can kind of talk about it.
Absolutely.
And do you know if there's any kind of timeline indicated for the infrastructure funding? Federal government?
It's so new. I haven't seen what the timelines are for the federal funding bill. I think we're just now seeing enough support that it's going to move forward. And, hopefully we'll have some FAQs and guidelines that are provided to us that will give us more indication of the timelines for the hopefully it passes.
Well, once it passes, then, yeah, that's. hopefully.
And I don't want to forget too that, even today, with the announcement of the revised health order tomorrow, The city is continuing to incur expenses in buying N95 masks and other things. Now, I want to say it's not a big dollar item per se, but we are having expenses related to responding to the pandemic, and that's part of what this bill was intended to help offset in this process. There's some costs that we address with sort of this now. I think it'll be on the smaller side. I don't want to forget that we do have expenses that are kind of extraordinary. We bought a lot of the things, the cleaning supplies and all those other things that we have.
And I'd like to see those calculated into the EOC budget that we talked about earlier. Because those would be necessary, not only for COVID in some cases, but the cleaning supplies and sanitation and all that. If we had a center, then we had opened up. So all these things could be really part of that budget, or should be,
They must be, because
Yeah.
that's what the money's for, in many ways.
Yeah.
So in that menu that you plan to present to us, make sure that you include CIP projects that we cover, possibility of addition to senior center as they continue to support the survivors and the people impacted by COVID, as well as the expenses for the Alexander Valley. And if you could also give us an update of what the conversations are regarding access to make sure that these infrastructure things can take place around teachers' fair, property, schools, and Alexander Valley. So, we covered everything.
I
there,
think
right?
so.
Yeah.
We're good. Thank you.
So the budget for essentials, as we call it, since we haven't gotten rid of Mr. COVID yet. The Alexander Valley Health Senior Center for Mental Health Services and providing support to COVID population, and CIP projects that may be able to be helped.
I mean, we made this pretty significant investment in
And-
open gov, for
and-
example, that's part
Yeah,
of what came out of COVID.
and the broadband also, because that's essential for the economy, as well as for us, but especially since we are in the past. And we are going quite, we are having quite time. There's just too much to talk about.
There is a lot.
Councilmember Powell, one of the things that I was talking to David about is about perhaps having a small meeting specifically on the governance plan.
I think that's a great idea.
And down the road, once we put some things together, the three of us, maybe 4 or 5, I don't know, of us here, then maybe outside of the subcommittee meeting, perhaps to think about a workshop for all council members to give input on what we have done
Before we go.
before we move on, because every one of us has different experiences, and there are very many things that technology has made different.
2 comments. First, I think it should follow our team building.
Yes,
Because I think that's going to be some things come out of the team building that we may want to incorporate in this. And the second part of it, I just had a question on the committees and subcommittees, regional boards. I'd like a definition. I didn't see it. If it's there, I apologize. Because I didn't read word for word it. I got this big thing and I started looking at it. But I would like to see a part of there that talks about the role of a council member on a regional or state board. Because I think it's important that they understand, future council members as well as existing, the role is representing our city at that meeting.
yes,
Bringing back important issues that could impact us first, so we can weigh in. And then giving some guidance and direction, so they go back and voice what we're saying as a body, as a community, to the board. I'm not sure that's always happening. I think sometimes it comes back. This is what they voted for, this is what they're doing, and it's like, well, we're stumbling, trying to figure out why we didn't ask, we didn't have public comment, we don't know. And if it impacts us as a community, I think it should be where we at least have an opportunity to weigh in before decisions. So I just thought, if you follow my thought on that, so we can have that conversation as a body when we go through the manual. What is the role? And sometimes I feel we get caught up or representing that board, come back, this is what we gotta do. Where maybe there's no choice on that, but I think we should have at least an opportunity to weigh in and bring back any concerns we may not have. If we do, bring them back to that board before they make a decision on that particular item. Because again, one brush should not fit all seats. So it's important that we have that voice.
No, this is definitely true, because, for example, I am in the Legal City Community Services group, and I have voiced my concern about issues of language access, the same thing as transportation access, that we in Cloverdale have not had in the past, and how it impacts other rural communities in the state. And, and these are all things that are taken into account when we go to advocate and lobby for small cities and particular cities to defend us from the city assembly. So it's very important that not only our council members know what we're doing, but also our constituents understand why we are spending money going towards cities and to defend the city. And the importance of having a voice beyond our immediate jurisdiction. So, yes, that would be very nice. Thank you.
So this would be coming back as a workshop.
So, Madam Mayor, Councilmember, if I can, first I just want to just take a moment to acknowledge the tremendous work that our city clerk, Irene back there, she's being so quiet, as well as our HR and finance and analyst Shannon did on the governance manual. The three of us were a team, and I offered a lot of input, but they did the heavy lifting on the document itself. We really tried to look at, a lot of cities have governance manuals for guidance documents, to kind of look at the best practices from the high performing cities and try to incorporate that into our governance manual, reflecting that there was already quite a bit of good guidance and language in there. So some of it was moving it around, a little bit of reorganization, but also recognizing that there was some outdated sections, and then there was probably more often than not, there's just since it was adopted, there's been a lot of development that we have new sections. Kind of as the next step, with the ultimate step being the workshop, maybe when we started this effort, we kicked it off with a memo to council, just again informational. Here's the document, provide your comments. We didn't get a lot, but since we've done this heavy lifting now, maybe more of the focus is on kind of review and comment. In advance of the workshop, where we can kind of delve into it, maybe it's just getting it out to council members and say, here's the revised version. If you have any comments, please provide by. And then what we staff can do is get your comments back, where there's consensus, adjustments or good ideas, kind of reflect that into a draft document. And if there are other perspectives, identify what those are, and then that can be part of the workshop discussion. There might be differences, thoughts, alternatives, where we can kind of lay out what the options and alternatives are, perspectives, and then that's part of the workshop, where maybe it's facilitated, to help foster a collegial discussion on how we can build a governance meeting that really reflects.
But, yeah, the next thing will be for the three of us, or four of us, to continue over before we bring it to the workshop.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned sending it to the other council members to send back to you, not to us, to you with comments.
Right. I mean,
So we'll meet first then? Okay, so we'll meet first.
and then we
Gotcha.
package it out, see if there's recognize that Irene, will be moving on, but I do want to acknowledge the tremendous work that she put into.
I don't think you should put it.
Yeah, I need it.
We can vote on this.
And so, then moving on to council team building, I submitted several names. David, I don't know if you submitted anybody.
And I got those names, I thought those were great with the names, in fact, some of them mirrored mine, and I need to follow up and get that moving forward.
We need to have a kind of a
Yeah,
draft date
Yeah.
for us. I would like to know what kind of timeline do you think we should look at, October, November?
Right, and that's partly, getting the scope of work with the schedule of the consultants that we get proposals from, so that we can nail that down. It's just a function right now, a lot of consultants are busy and trying to get it.
But are we doing an RFPs to them, or how are we going about it?
More informally, asking for a proposal, but if you prefer an RFP, it can go that way, it takes a little more time.
That we can do it. But we need to know, if they are available to us, without, before the end of the year.
I think the key is we can, maybe keep introduced through the subcommittee process, or, formally have work with them, proposals, get them sent to you, share thoughts, and perspective, and one that really stands out. I think this really looks good. We move forward to the next step. It maybe, depending on the cost of the work, maybe anybody. Get through that process. Get authorization.
So I guess just, I agree with Chair Cruz here. I think timing is important, and there's a lot of good consultants. We just need to kind of see who's got the availability, and if they're really interested, they're going to give you the scope. They have a standing packet they send out. And I would suggest, when I talked about this, that you get a hold of Jose from Myers Valley. They represent so many cities in the state. They're well aware of different facilitators as well, if the ones that Marta submitted to you aren't available. But the thing is, there's some good ones. We should make sure that we could reach out to a city that's used them, to talk to them, make sure that they're really satisfied with the work, and then we can kind of review that proposal.
One of the people that I went to, was Sarah, from our division.
Yeah, she's very good.
And she's delighted with something.
I'm just thinking if they're not available, that's, you mentioned somewhere busy, and I don't feel we're in a position where we'll wait till next year to do this. So if they're not available, we need to just keep, there's a lot of consultants.
Yeah.
So I guess the message you're hearing from us is we'd like it sooner than later.
Right.
And
So next step would be you'll get some proposals submitted to us. We'll review them and give you directly our comments, and then we can maybe put it on the agenda.
yeah, we need to start working on our calendars too.
Yeah.
And this is something we don't want to do. Either it's all of us, or
Yeah,
everyone.
and senior staff would be part of that, at least during portions of it, as well as Jose and city attorney. So there's a lot of calendars there.
Yes. So that's why it's important that we do that.
Yes.
But this calendar seems to be filled up too quick. Too much work. Okay. And this is definitely a marathon meeting. I don't want it to be a 12 midnight one. So, now, COVID-19, the next thing, cancellation that was already voted on.
Madam Mayor, this
This
is
is for the
subcommittee.
Oh, the subcommittee.
Yeah, we noted cancellation to this, it's an observed holiday. The committee, if you want to schedule a special meeting or otherwise, we
I'd like to suggest that there's a lot of things here. If you're ready to present some of these that we talked about, that you go ahead and pull us for a date, and we'll have a date to talk about.
Yeah.
But if you're not, then I guess there's no reason to have a meeting. So hopeful you'll have a, like the team building facilitator info and things, and a lot of that we could do informally.
And the Sunday, we'll go through like the 6th, that doesn't count. That's, the mobile clinic, is that what it is?
The St. Joseph's Health, they've had a program, it's provided funding in the past for supporting self-healing community. We worked, Kevin and I worked on a grant application to get funding for this initiative. And we weren't awarded, and I think the direction from previous members of this committee were to kind of keep it on here, just check in with additional funding opportunities to come up on for this program, so that we're ready to respond, and apply if it comes in.
COVID-19, we're masking up.
Right, key update is we received an updated health order today by our health officer, Dr. Sundari May, requiring face masks in all indoor locations. So I think that it's effective tomorrow. That means we'll require face masks at all city facilities, City Hall, and also our council meetings. Ensuring we're compliant with the health order. Today, the other aspect is that today was the first day that City Hall was fully open. Sorry, this morning. And we had been open, in the afternoon, but now we are open.
And I think we've done plenty of updating with the homeless emergency response. Measure P we talked about.
And there's a worksheet in the agenda packet.
Yes, yes. And pension liability, anything?
There's an article, again,
Yeah.
and I think this was, again, these standing items were, as information develops, either we'll put them in there every month, or as it becomes available, standing items, we'll put that in there. There was a report on the returns experienced by helpers, and how it affects obligations in cities. So that was just information.
Okay, great. And open golf,
The key update
Is it working?
It's working, it's implemented. I know the building department is utilizing it as an online building permit tool.
is that also the one that works with the business license?
That's it, we're moving.
But if you're gonna move to it?
No, HCL was a separate contract.
We talked openly up about it, but they just didn't really have the module like HCL did, so we moved to HCL. But it got the cost recovery, right?
1383, oh my gosh, there's no way things can work. But you're affected, right?
Yeah, but for the benefit of Councilmember Paula, SB 1383 is a requirement that is being, is a bill that requires the city to do a lot more reporting on our basically our green waste. And the intent is to move more products out of the waste stream that are generated from particularly your restaurant community, in terms of food waste, the compost stream. So there was a presentation to council on, happy to share that with you. They provided an update on SB 1383. The impact to the city, of course, is that there's going to be increased costs borne by our franchise solid waste hauler that we'll have to figure out how to bring those into the rate structure so that our rate payers pay more for the services that meaning there will be the cost of compliance related to primarily green waste, food waste. And then there's a direct city cost where we're required to, because we're trying to build this compost industry to support and create demand for these products that are generated from, it's not going in landfill, going in the composted. We have to purchase a certain amount of compost. We have to report it. And so right now, the calculations suggest we have to buy a lot more compost to comply than we otherwise currently utilize. So most of the cities are finding it to be a tremendous burden of how are we going to meet the dictates of this requirement. Many cities, what their kind of option is to buy a bunch of the compost to comply and then provide it free to the community.
And there's another loophole, which is, as we were in industry, which is to recover food for human consumption, like excess food in restaurants and so on. But the thing is, we don't have the logistics locally to be able to recover and distribute to our own people. So, there's still loopholes on this, and we're still working on it, because there's a lot of response from people that use plastic.
Sure.
So at this point, we're working, in zero waste, so you have my voice there.
Yeah, well, that's good.
And we're definitely working about all these people, because now it's just like this blanket policy that doesn't necessarily take into account small communities and rural communities that don't have the amount of restaurants to have all these additional waste to refurbish. So, yeah, there's loopholes and there's problems, and it is being addressed.
If that's working on a MOU, that would be applied countywide, hopefully through park council approval. It's been an evolution. We're trying to make sure that all the city's interests are addressed in this MOU and able to be implemented by zero waste. In a way that's efficient and makes sense for each of our respective jurisdictions. The United Center that has different interests in Petaluma versus Cloverdale, but the goal will be to bring forward an MOU that implements that requirement.
Okay, so, future agenda items, we already discussed some of those. Report on water and sewer customer accounts that we could do. So, are people feeling comfortable with extensions and so on? I mean, some people have not paid the bill. What are we doing with that?
Well, I think that some of the accounts just continue to be delinquent, and that was that. I asked our finance director to bring forward a report to the subcommittee can get a perspective on what was the normal level of delinquencies pre-COVID and now post-COVID, because we basically lost our traditional methods of addressing non-payment, which was turn off. We can no longer turn off accounts. So,
Give them penalties.
so some accounts that just continue to non-pay.
Do they have to show that it's COVID related, or they're not paying that?
There's nothing in the legislation that really requires.
Because I know on the non-eviction,
Right.
it has to be COVID related. They can't just choose not to pay. That would make no sense. For sure.
The governor's letter didn't state that it had to be COVID related, just that due to health and safety that we weren't allowed to during this time, and then, but he hasn't removed that.
Interesting.
We'll come back with them.
Well, with the part that I'm struggling with is they may have the ability to pay, they're just choosing not to. It's a little different than people that are struggling. I mean, I understand the intent, but to have a blanket non-payment and nothing you can do.
It's not going to be forgiven all.
Well, then you get back into what we don't think any end up legal action, and we'll take it to court, I believe. It's a costly, very difficult process.
And I would like to see if it's possible, if we want kind of a chart of how we are with the 25%, since we're gonna have to move towards more person, so that people know where we are, where we fit, where we are.
Yeah, we're bringing that forward to council on next Wednesday. We fully expect that between now and next Wednesday, we'll receive a curtailment order, or at least we think, based on what the trigger in the emergency order. And we'll be recommending council consider increasing our water station emergency. If council at the stage, based on our feedback, we'll have a recommendation.
We're also complying with lists of outside resources that a consumer can access. We talked about recycled water for dishwashers and restaurants will be able to look at.
Yeah, we probably won't have that ready to go on Wednesday, but we fully understand that's what we want to be able to,
And we want.
we want to be able to do that for the ad hoc, and reach out to our business. No question. It's really discussion on Wednesday is going to be focused on kind of policy setting around the urgency ordinance, the update on our muni code, so the urban water management plan, and then looking at what water shortage emergency stage we want to consider based on the new ordinance and based on our understanding of the pertains.
It would also be helpful to know who some bigger users of the water and a couple in my mind right now. And maybe, some of the ways we should be reaching out to them to see, because, when they calculate this formula, it's across the board.
Right.
We need this as a community to start really figuring out who the big players are and how we can help them adjust.
Absolutely. And we've done top 10 residential, top 10 commercial customers, top 100. So we have all that data can be generated really quickly.
It doesn't have to be public.
Right. So we've done it internally just to kind of assess for our own understanding, who are our large water users. But that's where staff would be strategic with the ad hoc to identify who we're going out to and what are some suggestions on how we might address additional conservation targets. And the things that they may want to pursue to reduce water usage.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you. You read it? Or they want to put the seal on it. Thank you, Councilman Paul.
Thank you.